Is that right? What? Where at? Oh, no. I just popped in. Yeah, I just popped in. I can do that. No, it's all good. I'm everywhere at once, I can tell you. But I'm not going to lecture you. I'm just going to remind you. Put it back on the list of shit.
Indiana University Southeast. And on behalf of the university, I want to welcome you to our 24th annual High School Model UN Security Council Conference. You know, I started this thing in the fall of 1990, and actually two of the schools here tonight were here that fall. With about 27 students, and I look around today and there are about 247 of you out there, so it's grown considerably. At this point, what I want to do is to introduce the Chancellor of Indiana University Southeast, Dr. Barbara Bickelmeyer.
Good evening all, and welcome to Indiana University Southeast. First of all, let me say thank you to all the teachers. Who are the teachers in the audience? Please stand. So, thank you to all the teachers who have brought your students down. Thank you to our students at Indiana University Southeast who engage in this and take their time. I know they enjoy it tremendously. And I thank our faculty and staff who make this event possible, because it's a really wonderful, wonderful event. You all are some of the brightest minds in the state of Indiana and in this region, and coming from Kentucky, and we value the fact that you are on our campus. You are here because you care about civics, you care about government, you care about your world, you care about your future, and you want to be actively participating in what happens. And this is a great opportunity for you to start to learn how to do that, and how the world works, and how government works, and how politics are done. And so this is a wonderful opportunity, I think, for you. One thing I want you to know about where you are is that Indiana University Southeast, as one of the 7 campuses of Indiana University, is in the state of Indiana the public institution where we have a mission and are dedicated to the same kinds of things that you value. We are the liberal and professional education provider in the state of Indiana. Our government programs, our public affairs programs are some of the best in the country. We teach 70 foreign languages at Indiana University, and you can access those broadly. We have wonderful overseas opportunities at IU Southeast. We engage students, and we allow students and work with them to go to any number of countries. And some of the folks here sitting here, when you're on breaks, can tell you about some of the experiences they've had going abroad. And Dr. Staten can tell you about some of the interesting trips he's had taking students abroad, I'm sure, as well. But when you think about what you want to do in the future, when you think about where you want to go, whether you go to Indiana University Southeast or another campus of Indiana University, or whether you choose another public institution, what I hope that you will think about, and what I hope you will learn about in terms of your experience here, is that the work that you do, the things that you learn, the kind of education you want to get when you go to university, and I hope you will all be going to university in the not too distant future, is you want to engage in those experiences where you learn about a diversity of opinion, where you learn about the fact that there are hundreds of right ways to do anything in the world, and we need all the creativity and all the problem solving that you can muster. And the great thing about a public institution like IU Southeast is we prepare you not just for your next job, but we prepare you for life. We prepare you for citizenry. You want to make sure when you go to school and you make that decision about where you're going to choose, that you'll have faculty who are engaged, as Dr. Staten is engaged, and as your teachers are engaged here, that interact with you, that spend time with you, that do take trips with you. And you want to know that what you'll get out of that education is the ability to critically think and to quantitatively reason and to problem solve. But
Of 28 of your children, we're not cruel. We left 27 of them with one eye. Go home, Arab, and wait. And pray we don't decide to shell it, as we have thousands of those others who are in our way, with the wonderful singing missiles the U.S. gives us. Go harvest your crops, Arab, until we decide to bulldoze your 100-year-old date palms and ancient olive groves, your strawberry fields forever gone. Come to Palestine, Americans, and see your tax dollars at work. Millions and millions of them, every day, and weep with me for our victims and our guilt, and then say, no more. And that's some of what it looks like when you visit. Thank you.
Questions? Any questions? Please stand so everyone can hear, okay?
Ma'am, this question is addressed to you. You mentioned a lot about Israel and their mistreatment to these Palestinians. A question from me to you is, I've heard that they've been imprisoning these children as well for, as you said, petty crimes such as throwing rocks at these metal vehicles, as they call them, their armored vehicles. This is my question to you. Is this a truer statement than false? Because I've done a lot of research on the subject as well, as far as I can get through newspaper articles and internet. It's nowhere near what you discovered. But I agree with your statement. My question is, do they imprison these children for silly things such as throwing rocks or being children?
Yeah, shall I repeat the question? I imagine people couldn't
That
hear
would be
it.
good, yes.
Thank you, excellent question. The student asked me, he's read and his research has shown that Israeli forces imprison children for sometimes just throwing stones or, what we would consider fairly trivial offenses. And he's asked me if that's true. Absolutely true. In fact, you don't even have to throw a stone. One of these children that was shot told, they pretty much will be honest with you. Some will say, yes, I was throwing stones, I was going to throw stones. One of them said I wasn't even going to. They just shot me in the leg, but next time I will. One family I stayed with, they had a knock at the door in the middle of the night, and they just grabbed their son and took him away for the night. Another boy went to pray, and in his school backpack, he had a little prayer flag, and because of that, they considered him a radical and took him away. So they do that. There are usually at any one time there are about 300 children in prison. In prison, we're not just talking about these things I described overnight, somewhere a few nights. They're there. They don't have real access to any kind of help. It's a kangaroo court. I've researched. I've been there. I've talked to the lawyers, and it is as bad as you thought. It's even worse.
Have you seen the rockets that have gone off there in Palestine?
No, I haven't. Thank you. The question was whether I've seen the rockets personally, and I have not. There are a lot of photographs of them, and I've seen those and researched them, but I haven't specifically seen them personally.
Thank you.
How long in the future do you think the U.S. will begin to correctly report on what's going on in Palestine?
Thank you. The question is how long and when do I think the U.S. will finally correctly report on what's going on in Palestine? I don't think they will do it until we demand it. Individuals try to demand it and we don't get a response, but the pro-Israel organizations are very concerted in their pressure. So they bring boycotts, they call them names, they cause a lot of financial damage to newspapers and radio stations all over the country. Even though all of those were very Israeli-centric in their reporting, it still wasn't even close to pro-Palestinian reporting. But they just keep them in line, I think, by that kind of thing. So I think there's almost all of the pressure is from one side, and there's comparatively very little from the other side. And the system is so skewed that it will not likely change very soon unless we pressure them. The Associated Press, that's the largest and oldest wire service in the world, is the major source of information for newspapers around the country, including right here. And many newspapers that are not necessarily pro-Israel, not necessarily owned or run by Zionists, but they get AP coverage. And AP coverage is extremely pro-Israel. The control bureau for the region is in Israel, staffed by many of the major staff members are even Israeli citizens who have served in the Israeli military. And they're filtering the news that comes to us. The New York Times bureau chief a few years ago, his son was in the Israeli military. So too often in the region we have partisans that are filtering the news. It's not 100%, fortunately. Sometimes there are good reports that make it through. But even those, often when I read them, since I know more about it, I still see problems, even with the ones that are really quite good.
You discussed how the media in our country has failed to report this issue accurately. How is the media in other countries done, like European countries or Russia or China?
That's an excellent question. The question is that I've described how bad it is here. How is the media coverage in other countries, in Europe, China, etc., Russia? We haven't done studies of that, but there's a book that looked into especially British coverage called Bad News from Israel by two Glasgow University professors, showing that theirs also is very poor, very Israeli-centric. Now, anecdotally, when I've seen the BBC and other people that go to it, I was in England a while ago, the news coverage isn't as horrible. When you're following this issue, it's very difficult, it's very painful to watch the news in this country. In England, it's not as painful. In other countries, when I research, sometimes I'll be researching the coverage of a specific event to see if it was even covered, for example, by AP, and often it was not. But I sometimes will find that the Chinese wire service that's available to find on LexisNexis did cover it. So that gives me the impression that that's doing better. Although the Chinese government now has, unlike the way it used to support popular revolts around the world, now the Chinese government is building relationship with Israel. I was in Beijing, as they mentioned, I was in Beijing, and some Chinese citizens working on the Palestinian issue came to me very secretly because they were very fearful of what would have happened if it had been public that they met with me about Palestine. So it's a little mixed, so I'm not sure. I've talked to somebody from Japan who says, I talked to the head of a major TV network in Japan about this situation, and he sort of laughed, as though he was very aware of the bias here. And he said, it's not like that in Japan, but I don't know. One last answer, though, is if you've looked into UN votes, you'll notice that the US and Israel usually are different than the rest of the world votes. So that's a bit of a measure that their reporting might be a bit better.
Does that be seen in the Holocaust, where they assumed that to exterminate people? Do you think that the Israeli people would do the same thing to the Israelis?
I couldn't hear very well, but I'll repeat it back. Let me know if it's wrong. Referring to the Nazi Holocaust, where they exterminated people, do I think that might be done to the Palestinians? That's a very good question. What seems to be going on is a slow genocide. Not one that's so concentrated and horrific, although a slow genocide is also horrific. So that seems to be what's going on. Now, before the Iraq War began, some Israeli professors, very, very highly regarded, brilliant professors, one was Ilan Pape, who's written some excellent books on this topic, sent out sort of an announcement and an email to the world, to people working on this issue around the world, very worried, and this is by a very rational, sober scholar, very worried that when the Iraq War came, since it was clear that was about to come, he and others were concerned that there was going to be an ethnic cleansing, another massive ethnic cleansing, as was done in 47 and 49. And again in 67, there was a ethnic cleansing of 200,000 people. And they were fearful that that would happen under the fog of war. It didn't happen, but it slowly happens.
Can you talk a little bit about the Arab discrimination inside of Israel? Like, what do Israelis think of Arabs inside Israel and like their status there?
That's another good question. What is the status of Arabs inside of Israel? What do Israelis think of them, and what is the situation like? It's very poor. You know, your question shows that you're aware of that. The Arabs inside of Israel, our media call them Israeli Arabs, which is a little disrespectful. They are Palestinians living in Israel. So they are third-class citizens at best. Now, allegedly, they're citizens of the country, but there are many ways in which they're discriminated against. In terms of resources, their schools are hugely underfunded. Often they don't. The areas that they live in don't have garbage pickup. They are minimally represented in the Knesset. It's sort of a few token representatives there. In higher education, they're there in much smaller numbers than their population would normally expect. Whereas in the West Bank and Gaza, there are highly educated. Many are highly educated, so it's clearly there's discrimination there. And this has been well quantified also. There was a book by 3 Israeli authors, one of them who had been specifically in the government, in the role of governmental planning and city planning. And in there, he gave very strong statistics about how bad it was for the Palestinians living in Israel. Just 2 more examples that are striking me. One is that there's a bizarre situation. After that initial founding war of Israel, not everybody was pushed out. It was about half the population. So quite a few people were still there. Now it's about close to 20% of the population in Israel are Muslims and Christians. Those people, many of them fled their villages and their homes during the fighting, as you would during a violent fighting. People go out and hide in the woods and in the fields, etc. And so at the end of the war, all of these refugees that had left the complete area, Israel declared their land absentee property, and they just confiscated it. That's where a lot of their wealth came from. I mean, these are beautiful, valuable homes, businesses, shops, confiscated all of that. But a certain number of people were still there. They hadn't fled so far, so they were within the confines of what became Israel, allegedly citizens. And they would try to go back to their home, often a home that their family had had for several centuries, and they would be told, oh, this is absentee property. And they would say, well, but I'm not absent. Here we are. Here's our family. And then they were designated present absentees. So present absentees still didn't get their homes back. And in other cases, there are people living in Nazareth, for example, and there are villages that they came from right nearby that are empty. There are no settlements there. There are no, well, in there it would be Israeli cities or towns. Nothing's been built there. They don't need it. It's urban. It's just empty land. But the people are not allowed to return to their village. You see, I saw the ruins of a church in which animals had grazed. And the one other thing, too, is that there are these villages in Israel populated by Palestinians that were there before the state of Israel. They destroyed most of the cities throughout the whole area, the Palestinian villages, etc. They tried to erase any memories of Palestinians. But there are these tiny villages that are still there. that are called, they call them unrecognized villages, which means they're not allowed to be there because Israel hasn't recognized them or given them permits. So the people living in those villages, of course, have no services, and their homes are under demolition orders, which means that at any point, Israeli soldiers could come in and demolish all their homes. It might happen the next day, or it might not happen for 10 years, or who knows. But this is the life that they're living under. In some cases it happens. The other cases, they're just living there not knowing.
Whenever you were there on the West Bank, like whenever you were speaking to the people, did any of them like appear to have any type of hope at all that their life would be different, like maybe anything would change, or did they just accept it for what it was?
That's a very good question. And the question is, when I talk to people, did anybody have any hope, or did they just sort of accept it? That's a good question. You know, there were a number of ways that people thought. I mean, I remember on that first trip, that was after, you know, after the Oslo agreements, there had been hope then. Palestinians had really had hope at that time. Then there was no hope, which is why the Intifada broke out. And I remember talking to one young man who had returned to Palestine. He was with the PLO. He'd come back, and he said to me that he was willing to give up. His family was originally from what was Israel. He was in Gaza. And he said, you know, I was willing to give that up. I was willing to just come and do this, you know, so he had hope, but he then no longer had hope. Some people, I would say, there are many people that are, in a sense, fatalistic, that feel that God, that are religious, and feel that eventually there will be justice, you know, maybe centuries from now. There are other people that feel pretty hopeless, and of course the ones that feel most hopeless are the suicide bombers.